Okay, so this video is for anyone who's either in graduate school or thinking about going to graduate school. I'm going to be talking about how I've succeeded in slash survived graduate school up to this point. Let me get into that in a minute. But I wanted to start with a question for you to put in the comments. I don't know if that's traditional on YouTube videos, but I'm going to ask anyway. So if you're in graduate school, what are some challenges you've had to overcome or you're still dealing with? And if you're thinking about going into graduate school, what are some concerns you have about going into it, or kind of what's holding you back in a sense? Okay, so let's start with that. Okay, so first off, my name is Corey. I am a Ph.D. student in the counselor education program. I've just went into my 5th year of being in graduate school, and I started off getting my master's at VCU in counselor education, but more specifically in the school of counseling track. So my primary focus was to become a school counselor, which I did for a year before deciding I wanted to pursue a Ph.D. And during the idea of that switches, I decided I wanted to do more of kind of that long-term clinical mental health work and less of kind of in school counseling, where typically you only get to see students for like 10 or 15 minutes and you have a much larger caseload and a lot of administrative work to complete. So it was kind of like the main idea that kind of sparked my interest into a PhD, and then I had some other factors that contributed as well. But anyways, this video is more so about kind of talking about, in general, how to survive it and also how to enjoy it at the same time. So first off, I wanted to kind of give some context. So I am, I guess, technically a second generation college student. My mother, she's the only one in our family who pursued a master's degree before me, and also in counseling. So I did have some insight on what the college experience was like. However, there was still a lot of gaps in like things like how do you pay for college, like how to navigate financial aid, how to try to avoid loans, which I did take on quite a few loans. However, I did learn quite a bit along the way on how to kind of develop some financial literacy, which isn't really taught especially in social sciences. It's more so focused on like psychology and like sociology, and for counseling programs more specific on the act of counseling, right? Not a lot of time is spent on like how to develop like these financial literacy skills or like to build a business or marketing skills. None of that's really covered. So a lot of that other stuff on the back end, especially for your personal life, where you have to develop those skills on your own. Or take additional classes that you don't really get credit for unless they're electives for your program, which depends. Anyways, the first thing I wanted to kind of address regarding being prepared for graduate school or kind of being consistent in graduate school is developing some kind of routine, right? Because to me, it's not so much about how smart you are, really. In fact, that's probably close to the bottom of the list of what it takes to be successful in a PhD program. I know it varies by the context of the program, but in general, from my experience, it's been more so about being able to be consistent, be able to have some kind of self-care routine that you stick to, and being able to build some kind of sense of community and belonging. Especially in my case, where I moved pretty much halfway across the country, and a lot of my community is not here. Well, none of them were here, so I had to kind of build one. And if you're going at it alone, like, you're going to lose your mind. You have to connect with people, whether it's your initial cohort that you start with, or people in club organizations, or whatever hobbies, interests. You need to take time for that. You can't just keep putting it off, right? And the other aspect I wanted to point out was that if you are, strapped for cash, because like in my case, like my family's not giving me a bunch of money to kind of go to school, so I had to apply for scholarships. So for my master's program, I was very fortunate to receive a full scholarship. And I still did a little bit of work to kind of help pay for other personal things. But for the most part, like, my tuition was covered and I got a bit of a stipend. And very, very thankful for that, because I would not have finished in the 2 years without it, right? So if you're thinking about going to graduate school, please, please, please take it seriously. Unless you have a pot of gold sitting beside you, make sure you look into scholarships. And depending on like the program, looking out for assistantships, which is what I'm doing right now. So as a PhD student, I'm also in a counseling assistantship, which pays my tuition, which is very fortunate because it would be out-of-state tuition in this case. And I get a small stipend that kind of helps pay for living expenses. Now, with that in mind, with those contracts, you're limited on, like your assistantship contracts, you're limited on how many hours you can work outside of that contract, because the idea is that you are investing the rest of your time into school. And if you need to work a little bit more to kind of make some more money to kind of pay for like personal things, you can, but some of the contracts say you only can work like maybe 10 or 15 hours a week outside of it. So you got to be mindful of that when you're kind of budgeting and planning for, your expenses. Now, in my case, like, I had to take some kind of drastic steps, which I'm not too fond of, but it's grown on me. And I know everybody's situation is different, but there will be some sacrifice depending on like where you're headed. So you got to be thinking this through, especially if you're thinking of traveling away from like your community, right? So I had to sell my car. So I got a little bit of cash for that, but it wasn't really about the cash for the car that was important. To me, it was because the car was becoming a significant expense, and it wasn't a needed expense. So I had to part with that. So at the location I'm in, I'm also walking distance to the metro, and which is also very close to the bus station. And I didn't really need the car, and the expense of like gas and repairs, like that was just adding up. And I didn't plan for this when I got here. So the first year I had my car, and I was driving in and out of the city just for leisure time, which is still important. However, like as I get farther and further into the program and my savings was starting to dwindle, I had to make some hard choices, and that's just kind of part of it. Because if I didn't do it that way, I would have had to find a way to pick up other shifts in addition to my counseling assistantship, which would have put on more stress for me, because I can't forget that I'm also a student. So you're doing the work for the assistantship, and you're also doing the work of a student. And if you're doing the work of another job to kind of hold on to luxury items, in this case being a car, you're going to get stressed out. It's going to be way too much. You have to really allocate a lot of time for not only the work you're doing for school, but also the time for self-care too. And a lot of us forget that. So when we're kind of setting up a schedule of like, our week, and let's say we're doing like a list of items of things you have to do, and like hours you have to be in meetings and classes and like whatever sessions you're involved with, you need to also put in that time for self-care. And that can look differently for everybody. In my case, sometimes it's like it's running, it's like cooking, it's cleaning, it's like making time for like doing stuff that's not related to all the work life. That is non-negotiable for me. I have to have that time. And today it's a little bit different for me than it was for like a year ago, where now I have a routine. So I get up around 5:30, 6 o'clock every morning, and I spend 2 hours on my routine, kind of just getting dressed, taking a shower, getting dressed, cooking, and I am unbothered by anything school related in that time. Like I walk my cat. Yes, I do walk my cat, and I make some coffee. Even the act of making like an iced coffee in the morning, and I have to be mindful of how much caffeine I'm doing. So I have control over that. I also have control over like the added sugars or no added sugars to that. And just kind of the act and the process of that is soothing to me. So I kind of throw it into my routine. So my routine every morning is for like 2.5 hours, giving me a chance to warm up and get ready for the day. Again, non-negotiable for me to not do that, right? So I have to treat that as like it's my job to take care of myself, which is really important, that consistency that's important. I know I mentioned a bit about assistantships and scholarships, but I'm going to mention it again. Again, if you don't come from money, you need to be ahead of that. You can't wait until you're strapped for cash to start applying for scholarships, because obviously it's going to take a while for that money to come in if you are awarded those things. And you can't assume that you're going to be awarded, so you need to be on top of them. Even the smaller scholarships, like $500, $200 scholarships, apply for them. Right? A lot of these scholarships the smaller scholarships don't take much to apply, and you'll find that people in similar situations are not applying for them. So it might not be as big of a pool of people who are applying for those scholarships as you think. And if you're thinking that like somebody more qualified or more experienced than me is going to get it, erase that immediately. Just apply, right? Make sure you just fit the criteria for the application, of course, so that you're not just completely wasting your time, but just apply, right? At the same time, also looking for the bigger scholarships. And the way you find out about these bigger scholarships is often with like social media, right? So for me, being in the counseling program, there's the National Board of Certified Counselors, and I follow them on LinkedIn. And they are always putting out information about upcoming scholarships for different reasons. Like one of the ones I just applied for was a minority fellowship, where if you are awarded the scholarship, you must commit to serving minorities in your field, so in counseling, which I was going to do anyway, so it fit me pretty nicely. At the same time, it would be a good opportunity if I'm awarded this scholarship to be able to meet with a cohort of people that are like-minded people who are counselors, and like develop new skills. And I think we're supposed to go on some kind of like trainings and get some additional mentorship. So there's a lot of reasons why I would want to do it regardless, but it would also help me financially so I can focus more on my studies instead of having to worry about how to make additional money. So that's an ongoing part of your process. And it's important, I'm kind of doubling down on this a bit because it's easy to kind of forget, because when you're like setting your schedule at the beginning of the semester, you're thinking just about the things you have to do. So again, with self-care and applying for scholarships and what have yous, you need to make time for that, and at least some mental space for that in your mind. So when they come across like your feed on LinkedIn, then you see it, you screenshot it, you put it on your to-do list, and you set a date to do the thing, right? So applying for it, depending on like what's required of you to do it. If it's like one of the larger scholarships, they're going to ask you to write an essay. They're going to ask you to get references. They're going to ask you. In my case, I had to do like set up a video for it, so I had to make some kind of plan for the video. Actually, I think I was wearing this hoodie for the video. Funny enough. But you have to have that space for it, right? So again, like getting out of your own way and thinking that someone more qualified than you is going to get it, getting to the point where you accept that you're going to apply for it regardless, and that you're going to need to make time for it, even though you may not get compensated for that time. However, at the same time, the process of applying for these things will get easier and easier the more you do it. And you'll find that if you're writing, like, let's say you write like 3 or 4 essays, a lot of the content that these scholarships ask for, especially if you're within your given field, they look very similar. So you may be able to reuse some of that work that you've done in your essays for other scholarships, right? So you're not entirely reinventing the wheel every time, right? So there's that aspect of it as well. And once you find like your people that are references, they're often be able to be the same people you can refer to write references for other scholarships as well. So you're not spending the time every time developing relationships with people that can refer, like that know your experience and know that you're skilled and what have you, so they can write about you, right? Usually I have like maybe 5 or 6 people that are my go-tos, and usually these scholarships ask for like 2 or 3 people, right? Okay. I mentioned this a little bit. I'm going to double down on it again, as well as like in addition to self-care, making sure you are connected to your community, right? So in my case, moving across the country, I starting from zero with no community, right? However, while I'm not physically around my community, I'm still in close contact with my family. I call my mother almost every other day. I talk to my brothers. I talk to my father. I have my cousin who I talk to all the time, mostly kind of on Facebook Messenger. We're typing back and forth, updating each other about our lives. We do entirely different things, so it's like we have to kind of like clarify what the thing is we're describing, but that's kind of part of the fun. And also with my cousin, I enjoy kind of talking to him because we're kind of competitive, even though we're entirely different fields, right? So we're not really, it's like, oh, I did this, I achieved that, I got this, yay. So it's like we're celebrating each other, but also kind of one-upping each other along the way. It's very interesting, but it's just kind of, it's fun. And then also I have other friends that I kind of stay in contact with. I talk to maybe once a month, or once every couple months to kind of just chat and see how everyone's doing. So that's part of it. You can't forget that. So it's maybe harder to do when you're not in physical proximity, where you're just kind of reminded of people just by the environment you're in. So you're in an entirely new environment. So it might be another thing where you want to put on a list of like, oh, reminding myself I need to check in more regularly. Because what often happens with a lot of us when we're like put into a new space, even if it's not far away, you move to a new space and you're no longer in close proximity with your people, it gets harder and harder to stay in contact, which is normal, right? At the same time, if you want to still maintain those connections, you got to be more intentional about maintaining those connections, right? So I'm a big advocate for a to-do list. I have a ton of to-do lists all over the place. I have sticky notes. I got a bunch of stuff I like poke into the walls. I have like things and reminders for me for my day, for my week, for like different programs, for like my personal life. All of it's like, it's kind of chaotic, but it makes sense to me. And I love the aspect of like having physical reminders, not just on my phone, although I do use my phone for things too. But when you have like let's say a sticky note that you have a reminder that you put on the wall, it's just something kind of cathartic about it, or maybe soothing about it. When you finish the thing and you take it and crumple it up and just throw it in the trash, it's like, okay, I'm done with that. Now what's next? And you find the next sticky note and you do the thing, and then you take it off, crumple it up, throw it away. It's fun. Make these things fun. That's really important too. Never forget fun. I didn't write that on my list here, but it's really important to add fun into your routines, right? Finding things and constantly thinking about like how you can improve your days as they are, right? Finding things that you enjoy, taking things that you already enjoy, making them more enjoyable, taking things that you are like less interested in, but part of your to-dos, things that you have to do. How can you make those things a bit more interesting? Or even if it's not so clear on how to make it interesting, kind of sitting back and thinking about how you can approach it from a different perspective. Let's see if I can think of an example here. So I have to write a lot of notes, clearly, as a counselor. Like we have to write notes about our sessions, right? That's not always the most fun thing. Like clearly, like that's not fun for me because I left like school counseling largely because of all the administrative work you have to do. Now, as a professional counselor, we still do administrative work, just not as intensely, and it's more so focused on the note-taking than anything else. And I found ways to make it not necessarily more interesting, but I took more time to research SOAP notes, right? That's essentially the type of notes I use. So I would go and I research articles on how to write SOAP notes specifically, right? And there's a lot of research around how to do so. They add like different kind of questions because there's different styles of approaching it. There's different questions you could be answering and different way of looking at it and approaching it than I had originally thought of, which made it more interesting for me. And a little bit, it actually not just interesting, but I was more easily able to write them without trying to figure out what I should be thinking about, right? It helped like systemize my thinking a bit more instead of just trying to figure out and just try to remember everything. So my notes became a little bit more concise in that way, because sometimes I would write too much because I didn't want to avoid, like I didn't want to miss anything. And so when I went back to reviewing my notes, I could clearly recall what's happening with the client, right? And now in this case, I write something a little bit more concise, but still thorough. And then if I look back to it, I still remember what was going on with the client, and I know what ideas I had for what to do next with them the next time I meet them, right? So that kind of thing, whereas like that part took more of a research approach to kind of get me more invested into it and getting more of an insight into like how the process can be done and how it can be done differently. It made things a little bit more streamlined for me in that way. So think about like stuff like that, because when I'm talking about notes, I'm talking about like 10, 15 minutes per like client I see. Maybe I see like 4 or 5 clients. So I'm not talking about a large amount of time, maybe an hour and a half in a day that I'm seeing clients that I'm talking about, but just taking this additional time that no one told me to do to investigate this one aspect of my life. Now that hour and a half of time is less stressful for me. It's actually more enjoyable to me, which makes a huge impact on like how I spend my whole week or how I feel by the end of my week after doing so many hours of note taking, right? So looking into these different aspects of life that are just kind of like less pleasant, more draining, and seeing how you can tweak them to make it a bit more enjoyable. It doesn't have to go from like that sucks to fantastic, but let's say like at a scale of 1 to 10, like it feels like a 4, which is, you know, on the low end is kind of 4. How could you make that a 5? Right? How can we take this a little bit to make it a little bit more enjoyable, like a 5? And then maybe next week we'll look at how to make it a 5.5 and then a 6. It doesn't always have to reach a 10, but you get the idea. Okay. That's a bit all I had with the idea of succeeding in and survival of graduate school. I want to kind of just ask, if you haven't done already, I would really love to know kind of your experiences in graduate school or your experiences of kind of preparing to go into graduate school and like what you're thinking behind it, what questions you may have, and put them in the comments below. And I'll do my best to see if I can answer those questions. All right. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and all that stuff that YouTubers say. That would help the channel a bit. I do want to kind of do more of these things. I'm trying to be more intentional about integrating this into my day. So the interesting thing is like I've been avoiding doing this because I've only been doing it during like vacations for the most part, and then I have like random spurts of ideas every now and then. However, now like I enjoy doing it so much that I was like, okay, I need to find a way to integrate to my days. So I've sacrificed, not really sacrificed, that's a harsh word, by getting up a little bit earlier and making this part of my routine. So I have my routine for a couple hours, and then I add like kind of working on like a video, or even if it's ideas for a video or actually recording a video before I kind of start my day. And that kind of varies day by day because my schedule is kind of moves around depending on what classes I'm in and like where, if I'm working on the assistantship that day or what have you. But anyways, I want to try to give it like at least an hour a day, if not every other day. We're going to do a little bit of experiment here, but I definitely want to commit to more video making. So I would love some content ideas. I would love to hear some questions and see how we can kind of work together in this aspect. A bit of a collaborative experience, if you will. Okay, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.